Hi, I'm Richard from Talkies and Tomes, where we talk about movies, books, everything in between. Or as I've started calling it, the most important things of the least important things. On January 28th, The Hollywood Reporter dropped the news that Brandon Sanderson and Apple TV are teaming up together to produce the Cosmere on screen. Now, what that means fully, we don't quite know yet. What it looks like is that we will get feature adaptations of Mistborn, and that the Stormlight Archive will be more like an episodic TV show, with nothing else released about any of the other books in the Cosmere. Brandon Sanderson, selling 50 million plus books, has parlayed that success into a huge thing for us fantasy fans. And for fantasy fans, this is huge. We've been lucky to have the Rings of Power and other Lord of the Rings adaptations. We've been lucky with Game of Thrones, House of Dragons, etc. But to have something new and something which we've wished for a long time, this is really exciting. And while, as I say, there's rumour that these things will be features and TV series, there's no actual confirmation as of yet whether it'll be live action, animation, other formats. I'd maybe suggest there'll be a mixture of formats for different parts of the Cosmere. But what I want to cover today is, I suspect that Mistborn will be a live action feature series. And if so, you've got me thinking, who would we like to see cast in that? And all I want to do today is offer my own personal thoughts, a little bit of conjecture about who I think could be cast in the big four roles in the Mistborn Final Empire adaptation. So those four roles are going to be Vin, Elend Venture, Sazed, and Kelsier. And if you enjoy this, please give me a like, give me a follow, but also pop in the comments if you think I'm on point, wildly off, and who you think could be cast in these roles. First off, we're going to look at Vin. So Vin as a character, I think you need somebody who's a bit younger, somebody who is quite slight and unassuming, so they can play that role of the street kid and the unassuming person in the gang. But then that person also needs to have the gravitas to fill in the noble scenes, but also, not to give any spoilers away for those who may not have read the books, but, needs to be able to look like a formidable warrior later in the story. So with that in mind, I think my first initial thought was somebody like Daphne Keane. She has experience in fantasy roles with her roles in His Dark Materials. She's, everything I've seen her in, she's been a wonderful actress from Logan through to His Dark Materials. I think she would be able to fulfill that kind of scrappy underdog role, and I think that you could see her being that formidable warrior. Another maybe out there thought is maybe she's a little bit too big for this, but I was thinking of Jenna Ortega. Again, has that kind of dark sullenness that I think would really suit a Vin, and almost that mistrusting look where Vin is going to be at the initial point of the story. But we've seen her with her chops in Wednesday do different parts of these kinds of roles where she can be tough, she can be formidable, she can be vicious. She's not like big compared to other people. Again, so fits that kind of quite small, slight person. So I think if Jenna Ortega would be up for it, I think that'd be a great casting. Somebody else who I think could be really excellent in the role would be Amanda Stenberg. She was wonderful, I thought, in the criminally underrated Star Wars Acolyte as the twins Osha and May. And I think, again, she's got those chops to play a variety of roles. Both of those are two very different characters, two sides to the same coin almost. And I think that would work well with a Vin of that kind of duplicity of initially starting as the underdog and then becoming something more powerful. Amanda could be very similar to Daphne King in having that kind of going from the vulnerable to the feisty to the powerful. I think, again, I'd really like to see Amanda in this role. And my fourth pick is a little bit more, again, out there, and I'm not sure it would necessarily work or she would go for it, but Millie Bobby Brown. We've seen her as 11 in Stranger Things, playing the underdog becoming more powerful, becoming the powerful warrior against the big bad. She just came to mind as a possibility, and I quite liked it, and I think it's a good conversation. So those are my 4 thoughts for Vin. Let's go over them again. Daphne Keane, Jenna Ortega, Amanda Stenberg, and Millie Bobby Brown. So that's my 4 offers for Vin. What do you guys think? Any thoughts in the comments? Casting next, I'd go for Elend Venture. Thinking there is you need somebody quite princely, somebody who can be that kind of noble blood prince, but who later on will be a bit more humble, will be a stronger, again, feistier character than we initially see him as he grows through the books. Again, no spoilers. I think casting this 15 years ago, maybe I would have had Chris Hemsworth in there. He would, for me, be very quickly the embodiment, or even Liam Hemsworth. I think they have the look and that kind of embodiment of who Elend Venture would be. And with that, you can probably see what I'm going for my first suggestion here, which is Jacob Elordi. I think he's got that prince look down. I think he can be big, he can be strong and noble, but I don't think he is kind of so arrogant that he couldn't come across much more grounded later on. And then after that, I was thinking maybe something like a Barry Keoghan would work, or a Paul Mescal. Both of them, again, in big roles at the moment, but I think both of them could do that kind of the confidence of the noble, but have definitely got that kind of be the good guy in the end feel about them. And along with those thoughts, I went towards maybe Ansel Elgort. I think he looked really good in things like Baby Driver, and I think, he would work well with some of the other actresses that I've suggested for Vin. And I think that, from what I've seen, his performances are great, and I would love to see him in that role. And a couple of maybe outsiders, then final suggestions here would be Cameron James King. I've really seen him grow as an actor. I think as well, like his facial expressions, he's got quite very emotive eyes. And I just think that could work well for Elend when he's in some more of his thoughtful stages and when it's seeing him away from the crowd. And I'm almost certainly going to say his surname wrong, but Corey Michael Creased. Seen him in My Oxford Year and in Seven Dials recently. And again, I just think he's got that kind of energy of an Elend Venture, and it's just somebody as a bit of an outsider, a suggestion part of that conversation. So there you have my pick for who I think could play Elend. You had Jacob Elordi, you have Ansel Elgort, you've got Paul Mescal, Barry Keoghan, Cameron James Key, and Corey Michael Creased. So let me know what your thoughts are. So then, who do I think could be Sazed, the terraceman, the teacher, the wise man? If I was just ignoring aesthetics, just going on pure vibes of how I kind of read him as a personality when I read the books, I'd say Paul Bettany. It's that kind of quiet, subtle teacher vibe. And I've seen suggestion, and again, I'm going to murder this pronunciation of Jimon Hansu. But my perspective on that is I think he would do great in the role. I'm just not quite sure he kind of fits that role where I think somebody needs to be a bit more pensive and passive. I think he's a bit more forward with his acting from what I've seen him in. Somebody kind of out there, and I mean, he'd have to shave his head, so questions there would be Daveed Diggs. I think he's, from all the acting I've seen of him, I really like his character acting. I think he's got a lot of variety there. I think he could do that kind of more passive character, and he'd be very powerful in that role. And thinking more deeply about actors, maybe somebody like Naveen Andrews or Riz Ahmed. I think both of them, whenever I've seen them in roles, I've just really enjoyed them on the screen. And I just think Sazed is such a challenging character. I think they would both offer really interesting interpretations. So those are my 5 picks for potential casting options for Sazed. As I said, pure vibes, Paul Bettany. Got Jimon Hansu, Naveed Andrews, Riz Ahmed, and Daveed Diggs. Finally, casting Kelsier, the survivor of Halcyon. I think this is such an interesting role to cast. I think 20 years ago I could have seen it being Heath Ledger. I could definitely seen it being Nikolaj Coster-Waldron of Game of Thrones fame. I think unfortunately he's probably too old now. We're looking for somebody mid to late 30s. With that in mind, I immediately thought of Will Poulter. I think he has really grown as an actor recently. And every time I look at fan art, fan depictions of Kelsier at the minute, I'm just like, it's Will Poulter. So I think he's my first and probably most obvious pick. And kind of similar with that kind of like heroic look, I think somebody like Sam Claflin could be excellent. Now, Sam Claflin's done several roles where I've watched him and thought he's incredibly heroic, for everything from Hunger Games to more recent pieces. And I think he has the emotional depth to play the Kelsier role, which I think is interesting in that it's that leader and that outward role, but you see a different side of him when he's in the stories with Vin. But Brandon Sanderson says that Kelsier is a psychopath, so it immediately made me think of Will Poulter's The Bear castmate, Jeremy Allen White. I think we've seen him particularly in The Bear, things like The Iron Claw, where he has played really intense characters who have a lot of depth, and maybe he could be an option. And somebody else who I think kind of sits between a couple of these kind of categories I've talked about would be Domhnall Gleeson. I think he's maybe a bit more rugged, but I think he could also play somebody quite dark and powerful, and I think he'd be a great actor for the fit. So again, my picks for Kelsier: Will Poulter, Sam Claflin, Jeremy Allen White, Dom Gleeson. Any thoughts on the casting there? Anybody else that you think could be even better? I'm well open for suggestions. I'm very excited. So that's who I think could be options for casting in the big four roles in a Mistborn live action adaptation. Let me know what you think about those. Let me know who you think maybe some of the other wider characters could be. Who's going to be a Spooks? Who's going to be a Darks? And I think Marsh is going to be a really interesting one to cast. And thank you for watching us today on Talkies and Tomes. Let me know if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see if I can do some more videos on the Cosmere as we go forward. And as we close up, as ever, please give us a like and subscribe and hit that bell.